Okay, welcome to white wine tasting. Each of you should have picked up your white wine samples. If you haven't picked up your white wine samples, you can always do this class first, and then try the wines later. But we did make little small bottles of each of the wines that we are trying here today, and you can pick those up from Shelly, and that's probably the best way to be able to take this class. They are available during this weekend, and then after that they really won't be viable because they haven't been bottled in a pressurized professional way, just as something for this. So today we're going to try 5 different wines. We're going to start out with Petit Ami, which is closed with a screw cap, and then we're going to move on to Chardonnay, Solmani White, which is a new wine. Many of you won't have tried that. Frontenac Blanc, we've had that in the past, but this is the current one. Really turned out great. And then Wobegon White, which is our #1 best-selling white wine at this point. We're going to be trying them from dry to sweet. And both of the first 2 wines here, Petit Ami and Chardonnay, are technically dry. The difference there is going to be in the weight. So we're going to be learning a couple of new techniques here. I talked about the closures, the screw caps. The only white wine that we produce right now that doesn't have a screw cap in it, does Prairie Star have a cork?
Yes, Prairie Star's corked.
Okay, there are 2 wines that don't have screw caps, and that's Prairie Star and Chardonnay. The reason being that these are wines that are much better for aging. They have more aging potential, and they're going to change over time, and so we've used the cork as a closure for that. In general, if you see a screw cap on a wine, probably best to drink it in a year or 2 with a corked wine. That usually indicates some ageability of anywhere from 2 to 10 to 15 years on that. So glassware and pour size samples. So we did a sample size in here, but a lot of times you'll notice when you go to a restaurant that you will get maybe a full glass of wine, and we only pour halfway in a glass. And so the reason we do that is so that you can do exactly what we're going to do for you here, is swirl. You want to swirl without having to wear the glass of wine afterwards. So really, any restaurant that pours a half glass of wine versus a full glass of wine is a restaurant that has invested in more expensive glassware, because that's really the difference. Cheaper glassware is smaller, and so to make a bigger bowl costs more, and a lot of the lesser expensive restaurants just won't invest in that. It doesn't give you the opportunity to really swirl. Now, when you swirl, you find yourself just, dumping this stuff all down the sides and onto your hands and things like that. Set the glass down on the ground. Angie's laughing. Angie did that last night. What you want to do is just set it on a solid surface like this, because then you can really swirl, and it's not going to escape the glass at all, because you've removed the tilt. When you're holding it, it's a little harder to control that sideways tilt. So, this just gives it some more stability here. You'll also know when you do this, and you'll get this question all the time from customers. Oh, see, I can watch the legs in there. So legs are these little drippy things that are going down in the glass. I don't know if you can see ours there on the film, but you can probably see yours at home. And people think right away, or you can see Russ's legs down below.
Legs.
These are not an indication of quality. So a lot of times people say, oh, it's got really nice legs on it, that means it's a really good wine. No, it just means that it's really a condition of how much alcohol there is in there. And I don't know, Russ, if you've got the technical explanation for the tension change that happens in liquid.
There's a few things that contribute to it. Probably like 99.9% of that is just alcohol content. And then there's some other components in the wine, like glycerin, that's just micro amounts, but some wines produce more of that than others. That also helps create that elasticity, so it can cling to the glass. Sugar has a micro amount of that ability as well. So it's usually maybe, but there's always exceptions in case that it has more body. But 99.9% of that is alcohol. So you see legs, that means it has alcohol.
It has more alcohol. So the slower the legs, the higher the level of alcohol, right, Russ?
Yes, or in some rare cases, a lot of glycerin or glycerol.
You know, or
That's-
possibly a really, really sweet wine. If you're getting a dessert
Yeah,
wine or something like
dessert
that.
wines
with a-
have more, even though it has
Yeah, so if you get.
normal most alcohol.
Right, but usually a
But
dessert
even-
wine will also have higher alcohol, like our ports and things like that. You should see really slow legs on our port versus if you're going with some of our, what are some of our lowest alcohol wines?
Petit Ami is on the lower end. The Aurora, we don't have that out here now, but the rest of them are all right around that 11% range. So
How about
outside
our
of that,
fruit wines, where are they at? in
between
general?
10 and 11.
So those, our fruit
Those
wines
are
too
low.
will be some of the more, lower alcohol ones, and you should see faster legs. It won't cling as much, as, some of our reds that have the higher alcohol, or our ports, or our, Vidal Blanc. Although that's really only about 10, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
it's
that's
a
not,
little thin.
that isn't a high alcohol, but you might see
It's
slower
got-
legs because of the sugar.
It's got lots of sugar.
There's 4 real primary elements in the wine before we get to actually tasting this. I know you all want to probably taste it. Like, I've been staring at this glass for a long time, I just want to drink it, right? But we're going to talk about 4 elements: acidity, sweetness, alcohol, and tannins. And your customers are going to react to these differently. A lot of customers in Minnesota are really sensitive to sweetness. They either don't want a single bit of sweetness in their wine, or they've got to have something like hot dish in order for them to enjoy it. So I would say in Minnesota customers, the level of sweetness is probably the biggest differentiator for people. But acidity can mask sweetness, and so in something like our cranberry, which is a pretty highly acidic wine, but it's also very, very sweet. But many sweet wine drinkers will not feel like cranberry is sweet enough for them because of that tang and that tartness from the cranberry. Alcohol will sometimes end up feeling, or the wine will feel hotter in your mouth, or sometimes I get a little bit of bitterness at the end of a wine that is higher in alcohol. I sometimes get that too with wines that are really high in sugar. Alcohol is just another form of sugar, so it's both of those, for me, can tend to have that, and everybody reacts differently. And then tannin would be the 4th. So we've got acidity, sweetness, alcohol, and tannins. In our white wines that we're trying here today, there's not really going to be any tannins. As you recall from our Wine 101, in looking at the way that we produce wines, you'll remember that white wines are produced only from the juice. So the grapes come in, they are crushed and destemmed, and then they're pressed, and the juice is moved over to the tank where yeast is added. Yeast, remember, converts the sugar in the juice to alcohol. And we can do the same thing with red wines, but remember, red wines will also have the skins and the seeds present in them, and rosé wines are going to be made from the red grapes, but pressed like the white wines are. So white wines made only from juice, because they have limited contact with the skins, they will have much lower levels of tannin, almost imperceptible, and then white grapes also naturally are lower in tannin. So you're looking for a fruity drink here with your white wine. You're not really looking for the tannin, but these will differ in the amount of fruitiness, the amount of sweetness, the amount of acidity, the weight in the mouth. So there will be great differences between these whites. So we'll go ahead and get started here with the Petit Ami. What I want you to do, we're going to smell, we're going to do a small sip, we're going to do a large sip and hold. So first swirl, and then when you smell, you want to get your nose right down into that glass. So after you swirl, you're going to release a lot of the aromatics into that glass. When you smell, you will be able to get a stronger sense of the aromas in the wine. What are you getting from this, Angie?
A lot of fruit, citrusy flavor, or aromas.
Yep. Now, Petit Ami is going to be most similar to a Sauvignon Blanc, for those of you that are more familiar maybe with California and other popular varieties out there. So it is going to have that light crispness, and it is definitely going to have, you know, a citrusy. Russ, what do you get from the aroma?
I get lemon, maybe a little bit of orange peel, some mineral tea, a little bit of grass,
Yeah.
like fresh cut, kind of dried grass.
Kind of like hay. I get hay. You know, I get hay and I get those citrus, not quite grapefruit. On a lot of Sauvignon Blancs, I'll get grapefruit. I'm not getting grapefruit on the nose here. I'm getting a softer citrus, but definitely that. And then almost like a honeysuckle, like some kind of a little bit of a floral that I'm getting on that nose as well.
Towards the end.
Yeah, and I think that everybody is going to get something different. Your customers are going to get something different. Some of them are just not going to get anything at all. And there is no right or wrong to, you know, there's not something that says this has to taste like this. So then what you do is a small sip, and I recommend this for any time you're trying a new wine, is you take a small sip first to acclimate your palate to what the acids are going to be. Since we're drinking a lot of wine here today, I would recommend doing a spit cup. So what this does is it helps the pH in your mouth match the wine. So now with my next sip, I can better evaluate what that actually tastes like, because the shock of changing that pH in my mouth is over. So a lot of people will take that first sip and just go, ooh, that's not for me. That's because that pH is still changing in their mouth and they really can't appreciate what the real taste is. So then we're going to take a larger sip, and I recommend to really taste a wine, you hold it in your mouth for 60 seconds. And so get out a clock or put your phone out, and then at 30 seconds, that's when you can really evaluate the midpoint and what they call the mid palate of a wine. So pay attention to what you're getting there, and then at 60 seconds, you're going to get those end notes swallow, you'll get those end notes even greater, and then pay attention to how long the flavors persist in your mouth. The other thing is to determine the weight of a wine. I think it's really helpful to think about milk. Skim milk, 2% milk, whole milk. So as you hold it in your mouth at about 30 seconds, you can really start feeling that weight and start saying to yourself, does this feel like I'm drinking skim milk, 2% or whole, just by virtue of the weight in your mouth. And that'll give you an idea of the body. So go ahead, take a sip, hold it for 60 seconds. Well, we're going to pretend that was 60 seconds. If it was or it wasn't, it's pretty boring watching us. So, you guys do it for 60 seconds. What were you guys getting at midpoint?
Everything seemed to kind of balance out a little bit more. It was like the initial kind of alcohol and acidity when it hits your mouth and you get the first fruit impression, and then everything kind of just softened and mellowed out. And then it kind of turned to kind of got more of a floral and mineral kind of taste, and my mouth started to water, and so now I don't know if you could see it on camera, but I'd inhale a little bit through my mouth, you know, just a little bit, not that wine comes out, but just to help bubble some air back through it, and then it just freshens all the aromas again. So then I could taste the initial part of the wine that first hit my mouth, and it kind of just livened everything up again, and then I can still taste it, and so that's a nice long lingering finish afterwards too.
By the way, this is Angie over here, our HR person who you probably met when you first started working here. And if you have any issues, you know, with your paycheck or whatever, you can talk to Angie about that. That's where you'll see her. But she also really likes wine. And this is Russ, our winemaker, if you haven't met him yet. And I'm Tammy. Forgot to introduce us at the beginning. Angie, what are you getting on this?
Yeah, a lot of citrus, a little more acidic, but it does like smooth out the longer you do have it in your mouth.
Yeah, I really noticed that, like, it's like the different flavors that you're getting on the nose, they seem so separate and compartmentalized, and then by the time I reach that midpoint, it's like they are just congealed in one, and it's like a honeysuckle little lemon cake kind of a taste to me. So I'm getting maybe a little bit of that wheatgrass with lemon and then some honeysuckle on top. So it just felt like I was eating a really nice cookie. Is what that sort of tasted like in my mouth. Really pleasant, nice long finish. And like Russ said about the salivation, that's a real signal of acidity. So when you have a wine that's higher in acidity, you're going to get that resalivation back in your mouth. You know, so that's, notice that, it just feels like that little whoosh of liquid coming in to your mouth, and your mouth is reacting to the acid level. On a low acid wine, that rarely happens. So, all right, let's move on to Chardonnay.
Don't we pull the cork on it?
Yeah, we're gonna pull a cork on this one. So, and then Angie, if you want to take the cold one and pass it along, we'll pour out of the cold one, but we're just going to demonstrate the opening here.
Okay, so if you haven't seen one of these before, it's got like little discs inside here that cuts the foil around the top of the bottle. So usually, if you hold it flat, push it down a little bit, and all it takes is about a half a turn. You're gonna have to hold on to the cap. The capsule is turning, and then it should just peel right off. You grab your corkscrew. It's got, take the tip, try to get that as close to the center. Don't drop it. As you can. And then I find it sometimes easier to turn the bottle, at least to get it started. And then you can push it in. Personally, I don't like to go all the way in. Time is always a factor for me, so I try to do everything as fast as I can. It takes too long to unscrew the cork, so the cork opener has two different, what would you call them?
Little hinges, yeah, little catches there.
Or edges. So you start with the closest one, that's going to pull it up halfway, and then use the bottom one to pull it up all the way. So now, I've gone at least probably 80 to 90% of the way through the corkscrew. If you don't go in far enough and you have too much of the cork screw sticking out, you might be able to get the cork out most of the way, but then the cork's going to be kind of stuck in there, and a lot of times they break off. So make sure you go at least 80 to 90% of the way through the cork. Make sure you get in far enough.
All right. Yeah, let's put the Petite Ami, the full bottle of Petite Ami next to the Chardonnay, because it's profound color difference here.
If we turn them away, you can kind of see that a little more. We can get away from the label there too.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
Now, in this condition, there's a couple of different things that are going on with the color. It's the grapes themselves, and Sauvignon Blanc is one of the lightest colored grapes. Petite Ami also a little darker colored than the Sauvignon Blancs, but still one of our lighter colored wines. And then Chardonnay is just darker naturally. When you press the juice, you're going to see more color. But Russ, I was wondering if this is also a condition of the fact that this is aged 6 months in oak, and so it's going to have had more connection or more with oxygen.
Yep, that alone, and even just, the barrel is still extracting particulates and flavor and micro amounts of oxygen, and that those two are going to change the color, darken it a little bit more. And so naturally, the longer it's in the barrel, the darker it's going to be. The shorter time that the wine is in the barrel, the lighter it's going to be. So it could somewhat be an indication of the level or the amount of duration of barrel aging.
But it is important to know your wines in terms of this color change, because this is very true with Chardonnay, is that the additional time in barrel and exposure to oxygen is going to make it a darker color. It's darker naturally. But if you look over at the Wobegon, you're going to also notice that this is a fairly dark colored wine. It is not aged in barrel. This is because this grape is not actually green. When you pick this, it's kind of a gray color, and when you press it, the color of the juice can actually be like a light orange. And then through the alcoholic fermentation, that kind of strips the orange color out, but it leaves it a definite golden color. So you may get questions from a customer saying, oh, this looks like it's oxidized. Wobegon is not oxidized. Wobegon naturally has a very vibrant, very yellow color. So that's just part of the grape. And
And when people say oxidized, I mean, that part.
oxidized just means that it has had exposure to oxygen. For many people, like if you leave a bottle of wine open for 2 weeks, like some restaurants do, the wine will oxidize in the bottle. So when you pour a glass out, like I'll use this Frontenac Blanc here as an example, this has got a lot of oxygen sitting on top of this wine. And if I just leave that in my fridge like that for 2 weeks thinking, well, fridges keep everything really nice, they won't. All of this wine down here is being exposed to this oxygen in here, and that is turning it every day closer and closer to vinegar. And some of the flavors that you get as it is changing, to me, taste an awful lot like fingernail polish remover. And so if you ever taste a wine that tastes like fingernail polish remover, it is more than likely oxidized. And so I would say 50% of the time or more when I eat out at a restaurant, irregardless of the level of quality at the restaurant. I've had $100 bottles of wine that they offer by the glass that I have gotten that are oxidized. And I've gotten, you know, really nice $5 glasses of wine. So it doesn't really seem to matter. It's just a condition of how long they keep them, and every bottle has its own amount of time that it can stay. We always, here at Carlos Creek, we're going to date these when we're in a period of time in the year when these are staying open for 3 days or longer. We're going to date them. We also, and you'll be taught by Shelley, we purge the oxygen out. And we use these kinds of closures that you see here on the end. That helps more than anything else we've tried, but we still feel that 3 days is tops. Even with doing those kinds of things, keeping our chilled wines in the coolers and using the air removing vacuum sealers, we still only get 3 days. Many restaurants use 10 days to 14 days as their period of time that they keep wines open, unless somebody complains. So unless I come through, I'm getting a glass of wine. So I'm gonna pay $14 for a glass of wine. I do not want a glass of wine that's turned. So, which is another term you'll hear. The wine is turned. Turned from wine to vinegar, I think is maybe where that phrase comes from. Does that explain oxidized? All right, we're gonna give this a whirl. Now, we're just gonna taste this one a little quicker. You guys at home, I want you to do your 60-second thing, so you really get the feel of this. Starting with your swirl, your smell. What are you guys getting for fruit on the aroma?
I'm having a hard time placing it. It smells more like flowers.
See, now I'm really getting stone fruits on this. I've switched from citrus to having, you know, this being much more peachy. Yes. So then you take your palate acclimating sip. And I immediately notice a big difference between this and with the Chardonnay, I notice fatter, slower legs. So you know, more viscosity in this wine. It feels, oh, I forgot to ask what you thought of the Petit Ami. Where would you place that weight? Skim milk, 2% or whole?
Skim milk.
Yeah. And so now when you're getting to the Chardonnay, then
Is at least 2%.
it's at least 2%. If there was 3%
Maybe
milk, I
more.
would say this was 3% milk.
Maybe not quite whole milk. But
Right, but it's between a 2% and a whole. It definitely has more weight in the mouth. And I get so much more minerality on this. So I get all of this aroma on the nose. I get much more of that stone fruit on the nose. but then when it's in my mouth, I'm just left with this kind of this minerality, this real, a very different kind of taste, whereas the Petit Ami smelled and tasted closer together to me. It was the same elements, but I didn't get the minerality on the nose, or I didn't pick it up, but I certainly got that on the taste. How about you,
This-
Ange?
Yeah, it's a little bit softer, heavier.
Yeah, rounder. Other flavors that you oftentimes will get on a Chardonnay are going to be butter.
This one doesn't have a lot of that.
And I noticed that first. Is the butter maybe just more sensitive to it? With butter and but you know, being the winemaker, I've seen every aspect of this, every nook and cranny this wine's been in, and it reminds me of the barrel after we pumped it out. It smells and tastes just like that barrel. That's my first image that I have in my head. You know, which is another kind of important part with wine tasting. What makes wine so interesting is that it brings back memories that you've had, and everybody has experienced different things and different memories. And so, like to me, you know, nobody else has got to smell and taste the wine straight out of the barrel except me and probably Brett. You know, so that's the first image that I got was, oh my gosh, it smells just like the barrel after we pumped it out. And so that, you know, gives you that lasting feeling. Kind of takes you back to that time where you were when you remember those smells. And most of the time they're pleasant too. So I think that's what makes wine so fun.
I think that that's a really great point to bring up. Of all of the whites that we have up here, this is the only one that's been aged in barrel. So, you know, the wood flavors, the minerality, and I think that you certainly probably notice you're not getting as much of the salivation action happening in your mouth with this wine as you did with the Petit Ami. The acidity level on this is far lower, and it's lower naturally because Chardonnay is a less acid grape, but it's also lowered by virtue of winemaking. So this goes through the process, and this went through malolactic fermentation, didn't it?
Yep.
So malolactic fermentation is the introduction of a, well here, I'll let you tell it. You do
Alright,
it
so there's-
all the time.
We call them primary and secondary fermentation. The primary fermentation converts the sugar into alcohol. The secondary fermentation converts malic acid into lactic acid. Lactic acid is a much smaller and softer molecule,
It's
so it doesn't
the acid
have the
in milk.
harshness of the malic acid, and so it softens the wine overall.
Yeah, so if you think of lactic acid, lactose, it's the stuff that's in milk, and that's where that buttery flavor is going to come. And it also, milk is, you never think of milk as being acidic or tart or tangy. And so, but whereas the malic acid is very tangy.
Yep. And as that malic acid breaks down, it also reduces the acidity. So that also helps soften the wine.
And then the time in barrel
And
is
that-
also going to expose it to micro amounts of oxygen, which further softens that wine. And any wine that is high in acid, the longer it's aged, the more that acid softens. So all things, there's a number of things at play here that reduce that acidity, make it softer, and you know, there's, with the addition of the wood in this, I think you get a really complex type of wine. Let's move on to Solomani White. So now we're going to move into the territory of wines that have a little sweetness, because these first two here had 0 residual sugar. So on the backs of our bottles, a lot of them will say what the sweetness level is. There's a sweetness meter on the back of them, and this one, on a white wine, the sweetness things are going to be white colored, and the one that's colored in black, that shows you where that sweetness level is. So this one gets pretty far over to the sweet side, and if you look at our Petit Ami, Angie, do you want to show them the back of the Petit Ami there? You're going to see that that one, the black bubble, is all the way over to the right, or to the left, I guess, as you're looking at it. So that's a great help for a lot of customers. They find out where their you know, sweet tooth lies. So, Solomani White, what are the grapes that are in this?
This one is Pinot Grigio and Frontenac Gris.
So, Petit Ami is the name of the grape, and so that's what's in that. Chardonnay, the name of the grape, but Solomani is what we refer to as a fanciful name. Solomani is not a grape, it's a name that we made up, and the makeup of the blend, it's a white blend that's going to be just off dry, so just slightly sweet, and that blend is going to differ based upon the harvest. We're gonna try to replicate as close as we can every year to exactly this flavor. And so next year, we might need to use Frontenac Blanc rather than Gris, or instead of Pinot Grigio, we might use Viognier. So there could be a different blend on there, but the important thing to remember is that this is a white, slightly sweet wine that will be very consistent from year to year.
And if you ever forget, Michelle also printed the grapes on the back of the label and their percentages. It's pretty close to 50-50. It's like 43 and 57, 53 and 47. What's the difference?
So on the nose, lots
Oh,
of
man, that's
nose.
good.
It's good. It's really good.
It smells like candy.
It smells like
It
it.
does, like fruity candy.
It has so much aroma, so much fruit. I'm getting stone fruits. I still get a little bit of citrus in here. Definitely some acidity, not as much as the Petit Ami, not as much salivation activity, but more than the Chardonnay. So I'm going to put that acidity in somewhere between the two of those.
You know, because there's so much fruit in this wine, customers might think that it's really sweet, but it's not. It's really only like 1% sugar, which is half as much as the Blanc, which is, well, this is like 2%, and this one's about 3.5. And so I'll just give you the perspective. 1, 2, 3.5. That's the percentage of sugar. So when you taste them, just because it has so much fruit and it has such a soft, kind of like that candied flavor in your mouth, just because it tastes like it's sweet doesn't mean that it is. And so sometimes that's hard for people to perceive and to adjust to. But
So they're tasting the flavor of the grape?
yep. So it's just the flavors in the grapes that give it that perception of sweetness. That's kind of a really important word, is perception of sweetness. There's some red wines that also do that too. We'll talk about that later. But that's, to me, that's a good thing. That's perfect. If you can give a wine that perception and it actually not be, that's like a perfect wine.
Yeah, it really is. It's an achievement. All right, and we're back from break. The Soleimani is coming in at about 12.5% alcohol, whereas the last one you had the Chardonnay, that's probably at 13.5% alcohol on that one. So I definitely notice on the Chardonnay that more alcohol. This one is so well integrated, I don't notice that it's 12.5. I would have guessed it at 10, really. And like I was saying during the break, it tastes an awful lot like the juice from Fruit Cocktail. So there's just a lot of different fruits integrated together in there, and you know, it's got a nice length on it. We're saying it's probably like a 2% milk, and I think it's going to be a real big customer favorite this summer. I think it's going to be a big seller.
Sell itself.
Yeah, it's a great label, it's a fun name, it's a really easy drinking wine, so. All right, we're gonna move on to Frontenac Blanc. So, where's the alcohol level on this one?
11.5.
Okay, so we're going lighter on the alcohol. You can notice lighter on the color. This is Frontenac Blanc versus Frontenac Gris. Frontenac Gris is the one, Gris means green in, or gray, excuse me, in Italian. And so the grape, it does have kind of a grayish, pinkish cast to it. Whereas Frontenac Blanc is a true white grape. So it harvests green and it presses much lighter in color than its cousin, Frontenac Gris. So all of them, as well as our Frontenac Noir, are relatives and developed out of plants that were developed at the University of Minnesota. We grow Frontenac Gris and Frontenac Noir on property. We do not grow Frontenac Blanc. So same thing with Petit Ami is a Minnesota grape. We do not grow that one on property. Pretty much 100% of the Petite Ami that we get comes from Cokato. It's not where they are at?
No, we have 3 different growers.
Oh, we do.
Hinterland,
Oh,
down
that's
by
right.
Clara City.
That's right.
And Berry Heart down by Silver Creek Hasty.
And then Cokato.
And Cokato.
But
Cokato
none-
has the most, yeah.
Cokato has the most, that's our primary source of it. But yes, we don't grow those here. The Frontenac Gris that's in the Solmani, we do grow Frontenac Gris here. No, I don't know that our grapes are separated from all the other ones, so I don't know how many of them are in that bottle, but that is a grape that we have here, and there likely there's some of our
All of
Frontenac
them.
Gris in there. So. Oh, this might be the most aromatic of all of them. This is really not aroma. Again, I'm getting the stone fruits, I'm getting the apricots, I'm
Fruit.
getting peaches. Yeah, really a nice nose on this. Seems a little weightier than the Solmani. Kind of approaching where that Chardonnay was at 3% milk. Again, nice finish. Lingering finish. You want that. You don't want a wine that just ends. So having a wine that's got a nice, especially if it's a pleasant finish. If it's not a good pleasant finish, then you just assume that it stops going. But if it's a pleasant finish, you really want that to linger. That's a sign of a well-made wine. You know, you want that balance. This one is more sweet than the Solmani, but it's also higher acid, so you're getting that resalivation in your mouth. And because of that higher acidity level, we're able to bring that sweetness level up and really still keep it balanced. It does not really read a whole lot sweeter than the Solmani because of that balance in there. And that's going to be a challenge for you with your customers because they may try the one and then the other and really feel like they're about the same sweetness. And like Russ was saying, the Frontenac Blanc is twice as sweet as Solmani.
And if they do think that, that's okay. They're all, everybody tastes things differently.
Right. Right. All right, so any tasting notes here that we've missed?
Oh my gosh, like peaches and tangerines and apricots. You could get more, but more apricot in.
Yeah.
A little tangerine, peach, apricot.
Apricot is a really common note to get off of Minnesota whites. So you don't get that very much from California or New Zealand whites, but that is a very common fruit note to get from Minnesota whites, especially the Frontenacs. And I'm not as familiar with the Itasca, and I don't get that apricot off of Petite Ami, but the Frontenac family is, and La Crescent, another one where you get that. So the University of Minnesota produced white wines that have a lot of apricot, which is quite pleasant. We'll move on to our sweetest one, our best-selling one, our Wobegon White. Again, our darker color, a more golden color because we're dealing with Frontenac Gris. So this is a blend. This is also going to have a lot of Brianna in it.
Brianna, Grigio, a lot of Frontenac Gris, a little bit of Frontenac Blanc. This one we really try to create as much complexity as we can.
This one I get more floral notes than I get off the Frontenac Blanc. Get more honeysuckle kind of.
That would be the Brianna.
Yeah. Brianna's going to lighten its color too from just a pure Frontenac Gris. The Frontenac Brie is going to give it more of its acidity. Brianna is a less acidic grape, so it's going to bring that acidity down. So we may find that the Frontenac Blanc is going to read the highest acid of the ones that we have up here on the table. Would you say, Russ?
Yep.
Yeah. I can definitely tell the sweetness. Because the acidity level is lower on this one than it is in the Frontenac Blanc, the sweetness layers heavier. So you notice this. So if you've got a customer who really, really wants a sweet white wine, the Wobegon is going to be the better candidate for them because of that lower acid in it, and it just they're gonna feel and taste that sweetness.
It's soft and smooth from front to back. From the time you taste it to after you swallow it, it's just soft, smooth, fruity. And a lot more different fruits in this one. It's harder to pick up just one. Like in the Frontenac Blanc, it was you could tell it was definitely stone fruit.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more going on in the Wobegon. It's got the floral notes.
And yet I find the
fruit.
floral, or I find the overall the taste and the aroma to be more subtle.
Absolutely.
So there's nothing subtle about Frontenacs. They wear their fruit loud and proud, and some of the wines that ferment out hanging on to their fruit flavors more than any across the world. And it's really a hallmark of that Frontenac family. It's just so great at giving a wine such a wonderful fruit flavor. But the Brianna is, I would say, for people that are looking for a great food-friendly wine, and they prefer sweet wines, I think that the Wobegon would be excellent in some respects. I could see this with some really nice sharp cheeses and some Granny Smith apples, and I think it would make a great combination for appetizers or for dessert. For me, it kind of lingers on almost a dessert wine for the level of sweetness. And so for some people, you know, that's maybe what you want. For Russ, it's not. Russ is our ice cream king here. He likes
Sugar king.
He's a sugar king. Definitely likes a sweet. So this is not too sweet for him. It's not too sweet for me. It's just I probably would reserve it for a dessert course for me. And that's, you know, you can reach your customers accordingly. I think that any final counts or comments on the whites?
Enjoy them. This was a really good year. 2019 was awesome. It was an awesome vintage for white wines, especially the ones here in Minnesota. And yeah, a lot of growers got hit by a harsh winter last year, so we didn't get as large of a crop as we normally do from our Minnesota growers, but what we got was awesome. It was fantastic. So enjoy.